Can one of you please comment on how an IEP might effectively position their assets when coming for an interview or an opportunity at your company? Sure, go ahead, Michael.
I think the important thing is first stepping outside yourself and identifying what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then determine how you're going to present your strengths. And then step in there and look and put it in a value perspective of, you know, what have I done to change? You know, if you look at process, procedures, time, and cost, and I have what I call a success algorithm. So no matter what you're doing, you have those 4 factors that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, both internally and externally. And then you look at what you can do from a standardization, simplification, innovation, or a risk potential, meaning that you limit risk, to bring those change, and then present that to your prospective employer saying, hey, this is the value that I bring, this is what I can do, and put it in terms of money, people, and put it simply, situation, the action you took, and the results you got. And do that in 2 minutes. So
small task. Laura, would you like to add to that?
Sure. Again, building on Michael's point, most employers, in fact, most of us as consumers want an easy solution, right? Employers are no different. That whether it be in your resume phase of application or in-person interview, Michael's point of being able to articulate and understand what value you bring and how it applies to that job or that organization, it's very important. Linked in with that, your understanding of that company, you have to do your homework, right? It's through your homework and understanding of the environment that you're applying to that will create an easy dialogue in that interview setting or in that networking environment as well. So anything you can do to again, A, do your homework so you'll feel more confident. 2, know your own background, that skills inventory, and how it relates to the position or the audience you're speaking to. And the 3rd piece linked to that salesmanship is you have to step out of your comfort zone. Most of the group here are not sales professionals, but you have to take a leap of faith and in a charismatically appropriate way for your personality. Don't be afraid to boast a bit about your accolades. Put that all together, you look like an easy solution to an organization's project requirement or an easy fit or transition to a team. And again, understanding we're talking about diversity, when an employer sees, oh, you know, Mary Smith here could transition in quite easily. We seem to sync up nicely in a conversation. Her background and her skill sets are what we need. It becomes a much more seamless choice for that hiring manager to make. So do the legwork for them, make it easier.
Can I just add something to that? So I think something that I'm going to say is probably going to sound very basic, but unfortunately sometimes it gets missed. It's really about you know, taking a look at what you're offering on the resume, making it easy, certainly, but also making sure that, you know, it's not so general that that the individual that's looking at the resume, regardless of the job, is only looking at the same resume over and over again. So what I mean by that is take the time to do the research, but also customize your resume accordingly to what that job description is asking you. So pull out those keywords, make sure that there are phrases that are going to resonate for that recruiter based on what they're looking for. Because oftentimes what happens is you do get a very generic resume, but again, it makes it difficult for that recruiter to have to figure out where really is that fit. So your part, the part that you can really help out is take a look at what the job description and what it is that you're trying to achieve and ensure that it really aligns to what you're applying for. So again, it's easy and it jumps off the page for that recruiter.
Do you want to add, Peter?
I just want to add one point as well, building on this. Rather than just say, this is my list of skills, and what can help make it more Canadian-like is to demonstrate how you've applied those skills in your past experience. So rather than just say, I'm very good at team building, then give an example of where you've actually done that. And that's how you can kind of map it to perhaps the employer that you're looking at. So how have you dealt with difficult situations? How have you dealt with teams that have been geographically very diverse? How have you dealt with perhaps diversity within your teams itself? So that's a way of, rather than just a litany of here's all my skills, because as Chandra said, after a while everybody lists all those popular skills. It's how have you applied those skills? How have you demonstrated those skills? How have you been successful? And then show why that success can be done here. Because what you really want to do is demonstrate that you are the person that that employer needs and wants, and that you have the skill to hit the road running now, that you've got that experience. And so demonstration, and depending on how the interview goes, we're trained in what we call pattern interviewing, is to ask you those questions and then sit back and see how you answer. And that's your chance to really shine. And don't be afraid, a little out of your comfort zone, because sometimes we're a bit shy about that. But what you're selling yourself. You want to show that the skills you're bringing to the table, that applies to this company in the job that you're applying for. And then expand it to show how it can be used in jobs that you're not applying for. So what would the future look like for you to be there?
Thank you very much. I think, judging by their answers, there's a heavy emphasis there, and thank you all for responding to that. So I don't think I have spoken to one of our students that hasn't made the comment of perhaps interviews they went to that they were asked for gaining Canadian experience, and it's often one of the biggest stumbling blocks or one of the most frustrating comments that they hear in an interview. I need Canadian experience, and it's very, very disenchanting. Could you possibly expand a little bit on ways that you would recognize Canadian experience, ways that perhaps they could get some Canadian experience to handle that question that seems to pop up in all industries?
I'll take it just from a bigger picture, generic standpoint. When I say generic, across multiple employers, one of the things we train our internal staff of recruiters on is understanding, firstly, we are a non-discriminatory organization. A client who says to us, we have to have someone with Canadian experience, that is discriminatory. There's a defined line between that and an organization that says, this is a Canadian tax job, I need someone with Canadian tax experience. So I just want to put that out there. So understanding that, there are some times where legitimately Canadian experience is required, right? It's a Canadian legal role, it's a Canadian tax role, a Canadian securities role. And some employers may not be flexible to train someone, maybe they don't have the resources, the time, or the scope. But outside of those roles, I think we can focus the question on the other roles, ways of gaining that experience, it really is about networking and building your brand. Volunteer work's a wonderful opportunity. You're adding back to a community. You're also building references, and in any job search, the more close to home local references always help. So that volunteer piece is an absolute win on multiple levels. Networking in every form, again, we tend to refer people we know and we trust, and people we have confidence in. So whether it be an association that you learn of later on this afternoon, or whether it be an alumni group that's formed from peers from back home here, or whatever it may be, getting into a community where you become known as Chandra versus the head of diversity at TD Bank, where you have a personal connection, barriers are broken down, and very often that is where your resume ends up being passed around, and the whole fact that your resume doesn't show Canadian experience becomes less relevant or irrelevant. So I'd always link two pieces then: volunteer experience and networking would be the over and above resume techniques, but those would be the two proactive pieces that you could control, and I would highly encourage.
Do we have additional suggestions? Chandra.
Yep, so again, I would agree with everything that Laura said. I think one of the questions we often get as well is, so how do I network and how do I build some of those networks? So oftentimes we will talk about our opportunities through nonprofit organizations that are out in the community where you can get that volunteer work, whether it's through participating in language skills training, and through that you've built a network either with the organization or that particular organization has connections to employers. That's a spot that you can go to. TRIAC is another organization that TD works quite actively with and has mentor partnerships. And they then also have links into upwards of 30 other organizations that work with the new immigrant community. So oftentimes I think people think that you know, where they seek volunteer opportunities, it has to be with a specific employer, or it has to be something that is quote-unquote legitimate. However, a lot of, you know, through personal partnerships that you may develop through schools or through relationships that you've developed sort of on a personal side also can bring about and bring networks that you can create and then be able to utilize. So I think, you know, again, reiterating everything that Laura said, and then how do you actually make some of those networks? Don't be shy about going beyond what you think should be, you know, on paper and in a workforce. Use, you know, what you have access to immediately.
Yes.
Can I just add in very quickly to Shanda's point? TRIAC, and I forget the group they work with, but they're an equivalency education board, and the names escape me. But if you can, over and above the program you're doing, if you have overseas designations, contact the equivalent body here. But also, this group TRIAC works with will actually do, it's a small fee, but they run an equivalency that it's actually recognized. And that's something that you could put on your resume, and it has some weight behind it. It's not you saying your version of what the equivalency is. It's a trusted body to put on your resume.
Michael, did you want to add anything to the concept of getting Canadian experience?
Well, I agree that the volunteering and getting involved in other activities, and when I have a person come in and interview, that's one of my questions, you know, what do you do outside the job, or if you've been off work, what have you been doing to see what is happening there. But, you know, you got the analogy of when you come into a situation like this, you're like a spider hanging from a single thread from the corner of the room. And what you need to do is build that web and that network and touch points, you know, all over, you know, whether it's through, you know, religious group or a professional group like ISM, the Institute of Supply Management, or other professional organizations. But going in there and making those connections and building your network and trying to establish somebody as a mentor to help you through this situation. That's why this program here is so great, because it gives you that opportunity to build your networks and do just that.
Yeah. Peter, I think they've covered a lot, but is there any more to add?
I'll just take a slightly different tact.
Please.
Not to disagree with anything, but when we've been through diversity training at IBM, one of the things that come up when people say Canadian experience is they're not actually necessarily looking at Canadian experience. They're looking at the individual and saying, I want you to be more Canadian. And what I'm really looking for are things like, I want direct eye contact. I want a firm handshake. I want someone who speaks up, participates. I don't want someone who sort of shrinks back as a flower. So there's these kind of things that you kind of stereotype a Canadian to be. And often we prejudge people by saying, oh, here's a person from this country, I think they're too quiet. And so what you have to do is, maybe a little bit discomforting if that's been your culture, is to really say, what are the kind of traits that's going to endear me as a Canadian stereotype in order to come forward? So yes, I do make eye contact. I do have a firm handshake. I do, you know, raise issues, bring questions up. Often in interviews, we as employers ask the questions, but it's quite fair to ask questions back to us. I mean, we're not the benevolent society handing out jobs. We want to make sure you want the job too. So ask questions back. And so what you're really trying to do is say, I can thrive in a Canadian environment. I can sit in a Canadian meeting, for example, and act and put forth my ideas and communicate. I can do that. So it's not, you know, it's not to say that the culture is wrong or anything. It's just, I think sometimes employers look and say, I want you to be more like me. And that's the person I hold up as the one I'm looking for. And we have to look and say that, well, my role, like maybe I'm a bit quiet because I listen and I analyze and that's my approach, and somehow bring that out as a strength in the interview and in the skill, to say those are things, because in any kind of team you need a balance of all kinds of skill, and I can bring that skill to the table. And so I can take my diversity and make that a strength for you as an employer. And so we're often trained in IBM, we go through programs to help us get the most out of people that are hired. And if I look at our, just, you know, if I go into the Toronto lab, for example, it's very cosmopolitan. In fact, I would say as a native-born Canadian white male, I'm a minority in that organization. And it's because the managers have been through this very exhaustive approach of saying, you don't look at where the person's from, you look at their skill and what they bring. And you have to bring that out in the meeting.